chapter 1, kind of an interesting passage that familiar with. And find a situation where, of course, where Malachi is bringing a word against Israel and Judah as they're back in homeland, if you will. And it seems like during their time there, and if you picture this again, this is possibly, there's some thoughts that the timing is a little bit hazy or blurry, but a lot of people seem to put this around Nehemiah chapter 13, where they are, of course, already in the land, and they're already, walls are built. But if you remember, there was a time when Nehemiah left, and he left for a short time. And it's possible that this is kind of where that is. There's others that say it was a little before that. But at any rate, the actual message itself still holds true. And the fact that what they were, how they were serving, how they were, the Lord wasn't very happy with how they were presented their offerings. They weren't very, they didn't have the burden. They didn't have the desire, as we read here, for the things of the Lord. And one of the things that he asked in verse 6, in which we'll read 6 through 14, but he asked the question, where's mine honor? Right? Where's my honor? Verse 6, he says, the son honoreth his father, and the servant his master. If then I be a father, where is mine honor? And if I be a master, where's my fear? Saith the Lord of hosts unto you, O priests that despise my name, and ye say, wherein have we despised thy name? Ye offer polluted bread upon mine altar, and ye say, wherein have we polluted thee? In that ye say, the table of the Lord is contemptible. And if ye offer the blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? And if ye offer the lame and sick, is it not evil? Offer it now unto thy governor, and will he be pleased with thee, or accept thy person? Saith the Lord of hosts. I pray you, beseech, and now I pray you, beseech God that he will be gracious unto us. This hath been by your means. Will he regard your persons, saith the Lord of hosts? Who is there even among you that would shut the doors for naught? Neither do you kindle fire on mine altar for naught. I have no pleasure in you, saith the Lord of hosts, neither will I accept an offering at your hand. Just stopping there, quite a interesting the way they, again, were worshiping the Lord, and the way the Lord expected them to worship was two different ways. And we see that, he, again, is saying, where's my honor? Where's my, you say you're worshiping me, you say you're trusting me, you say you're doing what I ask, but really you're not. You're not doing exactly everything that I've asked you to do. In fact, you've lowered the standards, and you lowered what the standards should be. And so that's what we see in verse 6, where he says, where's mine honor? And, he's asking, why have I become less important in your life? They had all kinds of things going on, and they had, they had, of course, their livelihood. They had all these things that were going on at that time. And it feels like what the Lord was saying is that they were not honoring him as they should. In other words, he wasn't the priority. He wasn't the main person in their priorities. He was kind of second, or just cast off to the side just a little bit. And Um, and then, of course, why does everything else carry more substance than I do? Where's my honor? So what God's people were doing during this time, when people don't have a burden, by the way, the word burden is used there in verse 1, but of course it means a burden, a message that Micah had. So it is a burden that he had to preach this, and the weight of it, of course, came from the Lord himself. The Lord was the one that was sending this message through Malachi to present this, and there was a weight behind it. There's certain standards God said for Israel. If you're going to present offerings, I expect the very best. And if you remember in Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 21, God's standard was, and if there be any blemish therein, that is when you bring an offering, if there be any blemish therein, as it be lame or blind or have any ill blemish, thou shalt not sacrifice it unto the Lord thy God. Don't do it, right? And that was his standard. In Leviticus 22, verse 19, he says, and ye shall offer at your own will a male without blemish, the beeves and of the sheep or the goats. But whatsoever hath a blemish, that shall ye not offer, for it shall not be acceptable for you. So the question is, who set the standard? God did. He said, this is the standard. This is what I expect. If you're going to bring an offering, this is what I expect. And we looked at this morning that, a person with a burden for the Lord, a person, that has a burden to do what the Lord asks, that should not be a problem. That should be something that people automatically do. It should be something that we desire to do. It should be a joyful thing to do this. And we see that Israel at this time didn't have the burden that they should have had, and as a result, they lowered the standard. They lowered the standard of God saying, I want the very best, to basically giving the leftovers of their animals to offer sacrifice. And so, and really when you look at this is important because what it represented of that sacrifice, but yet God gave the instruction that every animal should be without blemish, right? And so when you look at this situation, the people, what did they bring? God says there, you brought the blind, you brought the polluted bread, you brought all these things, these crippled animals. This is the standard, but yet you brought something else that wasn't. You lowered the standard. You lowered by your own voluntary means. You brought something different than I expect. And of course, again, writing this possibly around the time of Nehemiah 13, and God asking in verse 6, where's my honor, is almost as though, again, they understood what God expected because they had Ezra teach them. They had others teach them about what God expected, Ezra being a priest, and he went over all these things. And so it wasn't anything that they did not know. It was something they surely did know, and yet they did opposite or did less than what God asked. And so what also is interesting to this is that, you think about that if it was written during this time, that they had experienced God's blessings. They had watched God bring them back to their land and bring the walls back up and build these things back up and see the city built back up. And so we find that God was doing nothing but blessing them. And then in return, this is what they did, is give the second best. And this is where usually an unburdened person or man or woman or person, whatever, begin to rationalize or justify, or they were probably looking at this and say, well, this is what we're going to bring. Well, who would know the difference, right? Who's going to see what's what? And God understands. He understands, and that's what all kinds of people would say, that God understands our circumstances. God understands these things. And here's the other dangerous one. At least we're doing something. Right? At least we're doing something. I've heard this before. out of a preacher, hey, at least you're here. And yes, thank the Lord you're here. But that's a dangerous habit to get in. At least we're doing something. At least we're here. What do you mean? That's lowering the standard. Amen. That's not putting, that's putting God. God says, where's my honor? You're lowering the standard. And so God appreciates that when we honor what he has said is the standard. And if we don't meet that standard, then how can we expect God to appreciate us just doing the mediocre or doing so-and-so, whatever it might be? And so, so that is the most dangerous thing. Well, at least we're here. At least they brought something. I mean, what does God want? I mean, at least they got, God got something out of them. That's really lowering God, standard on what God says. And so now these animals were animals in verse 7. Of course, again, we see there, ye have offered polluted bread upon my altar, and you say, wherein have we polluted thee? And that ye say that the table of the Lord is contemptible. It's not set aside. It's not holy. It's just a normal thing. There's nothing there. And if you offer the blind for the sacrifice, is it not evil? And if you offer the lame and the sick, is it not evil? Everything they were offering was lame, sick, second best, polluted, molded bread, leftovers. All this stuff, God looked at all this stuff, and if you notice there, some were saying, they were willing to present their cast-offs. In other words, animals they didn't want. Animals that were, crippled, walking along, and I every time I read something like this, I think of an old dairyman that he loved those cows, and they were really done milking from other dairy farms, but he would take them and milk them some more. And he loved those crippled. They'll be out there just crippled, walking into the barn and throw the machine on there and see how much more you get. But that's second best. And Malachi is basically saying, the Lord is saying through Malachi, that you're giving me the second best, or really the garbage, and you're keeping the best for yourselves. They would go through their flocks and see the very good stuff and say, man, that's good. I can't get rid of that. And I'm not going to get into my garage. But we want to keep the very best. But again, God's standards was to what? Offer the very best. And so when they looked at their garage and they started looking through some things, they were, instead of giving God the best of the flock, they gave him the leftovers. And some were even saying that they gave him the animals that were just kind of left to themselves and skinny and about ready to die. And so that's not what God asked for. That's not what God expected. And how can he accept that when the standard was bring the very best, unblemished? And so when you look at these blind and crippled, diseased animals, it was a direct violation of God's commands. He said something, he gave his word, he told them, and they rejected it. They went against it, and it was a greedy practice that they got a habit in doing, and they dishonored the Lord. And basically, they were robbing him. And he talks about that. Will you rob God? In chapter 3. Well, how do we rob you? And it's interesting, God asked these questions as if he already knew what they were going to ask. What do you mean we're bringing these, that we profane the table? What do you mean by these things? Well, this is how you're doing it. And so, again, they were acting greedily. And then he asks, when you look at verse 8, I believe it is, they were treating God lower than an elected official. He says there in verse 8, and if you offer the blind for the sacrifice, is it not evil? And if you offer the lame and sick, is it not evil? Offer it now unto thy governor. Will he be pleased with thee, or accept thy person, saith the Lord of hosts? He said, go offer those crippled animals to the governor. You won't do it. Why? Because you know what the governor expects. You know that when he collects tithes, when he collects things, that he's not going to accept anything than what is really required. But yet, you will offer that to me. You offer that to me, but you won't offer that to, in today's society, you can look at, well, you would do that for your boss, but will you do that for God? You would do that for so-and-so, but would you do that for God? So, the attitude, again, the position of honor and that man has, and as a governor, he says, listen, you won't bring those types of animals to him, so why do you bring them to me? And so, again, Malachi chapter 1, verse 6, he says there, you look at me, and he says, a son honoreth a father, and a servant his master. If then I be a father, where is mine honor? If I be a master, where is my fear, saith the Lord of hosts? O priests that despise my name. And ye say, wherein have we despised thy name? There's a question. Well, if a son naturally honors his father, and God was a father to them, he cared for them, he brought them out, he did everything possible to make sure they were well taken care of, as a father does a son. As a matter of fact, he calls them his son in Exodus chapter 4, verse 22, but he says, listen, a child's natural response, or should be a response, is reverence to their parents, or honoring their parents. And he says, this is something that we know should happen. As a matter of fact, Israel, you know this because it's written in the law that a child should honor their parents. So when you look at this, if they didn't honor their parents, then the sons or the children sometimes are put out and stoned. And so by dishonoring their parents, this is showing how serious God was saying, a son honoreth his father, and a servant honoreth his master. And if I be a father, where's my honor? Right? You will honor your boss, you will honor your father, mother, natural man, but you're putting me down below all this, and I should be lifted up higher than all this. And even a master, and Paul talks about this in 1 Timothy, about how that when you go to work and how you put in the full 8 hours or whatever it is that you said you would work, do it to the point you get there, to the point that you leave. And by doing so, you honor God among men. You show that you're working as God, as unto the Lord, he says in 1 Timothy. You're working as though you respect the Lord. So in other words, when you fulfill your duties and when you fulfill them honestly, you're showing the world your God. You're showing the world how much you respect God and how much you learn from God and how much that he means to you. And of course, by, again, doing so, you also show respect, and people see that. And so the same thing here, he says you honor, a son honors a father, a master or a servant honors a master. Where is my fear? Where is my honor? And if you're going to do those things, if you're not going to give this garbage to a governor, and if you understand a son honors a father, and if you understand that an employee honors their boss, then what about me? Where's my honor? Where's my fear? And the questions, again, that he points out, verse 7, is questions that, again, that he already knew they were going to ask. And he knew that really, when you look at these questions, it's almost as though they didn't understand or really realize or believe that they were doing anything wrong. They were just there. They were just going through the motions. They were, wherein have we despised thy name? He already knew that was in their heart, that question was going to come up. They were still there, again, going through the motion. They were there. They had the religious activities down. They were there. They brought something. They were there. What do you mean? Right? What do you mean we dishonored you? We're at least doing something, right? And notice verse 13. He gets a little bit more, shows a little bit more evidence here. He says, and ye said also, behold, what a weariness is it. And ye have snuffed at it, saith the Lord of hosts, and ye brought that which is torn, and the lame and the sick, thus ye brought an offering. Should I accept this of your hand, saith the Lord? He says, when you serve, it's a weariness. You're there and you're not there. You're just like, oh man. It's a drag being there. It's a drag doing the service of the Lord. I don't want to do it, basically, is what he's saying. I know your hearts. You're saying this, and it was like, man, it is a drag to do this. And he says, you what did he say? Snuffed at it. Got to do this again. Got to go to church. Got to read my Bible. That's what he says they were doing. They were not only bringing their leftovers and keeping the best, but God was just saying, listen, you're not even involved in it. It's a wearisome thing just to serve. It's a wearisome thing. It's an inconvenience to you. You've got other things that have wore you out and other things that have priority in the schedule. And we find that they were saying in their heart that God was too demanding, right? And he was demanding more from them than really what they were receiving and what it was really worth. And so, the people oftentimes, you'll hear this out in the world, and they would say, man, you go to church Sunday morning, man, what's in it? You're doing all that stuff? Is that really worth it? You're doing all that? Man, that sounds wearisome. But is it really? Is it really that wearisome? God knew that they were tired of serving him. And he notes that not only were they weary, but they were sighing. And really, when you look at this, they had no guilt. They weren't shameful. They weren't burdened. And he says the priests there despised God by offering unacceptable sacrifices. And really, what they were doing was they changed the whole idea of service. They changed the whole idea of giving. And when we read over there in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 of the Macedonia churches, when they gave cheerfully. They gave out of joy. They gave out of just saying, what more can we do? It's the opposite here. They're saying, man, we have to do this. Man, it's a burdensome thing to do this, to try to work for the Lord. And so listen, serving the Lord and doing what he wants us to do is a joyful thing. It's a great joy when you have, and it's great privilege to be a part of what God wants us to do. And it's something that they, though, got tired of it. And notice that they seemed to think the offering that they were bringing was acceptable. Wherein do you think that this is wrong? Wherein have we messed up, called thy table of the Lord contemptible? Where is these things? What do you mean, Lord? Well, he's saying you despise my name with offerings. They were performing the duties. They were going through the motion. They did it correctly, but their attitude was, here's the leftovers. And they looked at the service as something that really was a byproduct or something second in their life. In other words, they didn't see a need of it. They didn't see a need for God. They didn't see a need for sacrifices. They just were going through, the motions, I guess. And notice God says the fault was not only the people, verse 6, but he says the priest. He says, where's my fear, saith the Lord? Where's my honor? O ye priest that despise my name. And ye say, wherein have we despised thy name? He's talking directly to the priest, but also to the people, because the people were bringing the offerings. But the priest were taking the offerings and acting like nothing was wrong. That's a double whammy there. So not only were they, the people in the wrong, but the priests were either they didn't care or they were just going along with it as well. Well, we're just going through it, right? And so it was a shameful mockery, if you will, of the very sacrifice system that God had set aside and that should have been perfect without blemish. And of course, it feels like that no one's heart was in the Lord's work. In fact, they despised it. They said, man, this is a wearisome thing. This is just not what I expected. And there's more important things to do. And so the attitude that we find in Malachi, and it's something when you think about dishonoring the Lord, and when you think about not giving God the best and not having a burden, that all comes from Satan himself. Satan is the one who dishonored God, and really, when you think about the devil, Lucifer serving the Lord, He was one who God created to in a position to serve him and to enjoy his service, to enjoy, if you will, giving unto the Lord. But of course, the Bible says that in Isaiah chapter 14 that I will ascend, I will rise up. I'm not satisfied, and I'm not satisfied where I'm at. I'm not satisfied, and I'm going to do something more. And of course, the Lord said in Ezekiel 28 that thou wast perfect in all thy ways from the day that thou wast created till iniquity was found in thee. Where? From the inside. Your iniquity from within, basically by doing, looking at yourself and having pride in your heart, you lost the burden for the Lord. You lost the burden for your position. You lost the burden for the responsibility of lifting up the Lord. And that's where sin begins. It's an inside job. And of course, we look at Ezekiel, and you look at these things, and you look at Lucifer, and you begin to look at all the things that the beauty and all the things that God created him, and his wisdom and position. But instead of giving God the glory, what did he do? I'm going to be better than it, right? It's not worth it. It's a wearisome thing to serve the Lord. I'm going to serve myself, if you will. And so, in his pride, that's what he did. And of course, we know that that's what Satan did to tempt man. God gave man a burden in Genesis chapter 3. Serve me. Don't eat of that fruit, right? But what does Satan do? Did God really say that? Right? Did God really say that? You know, one of the ways that Satan tempts you to lose the burden to serve the Lord is by asking the question, did God really say that? Did God really say to bring the very best? Did God really say it? And, and of course that question was designed to do one thing, to make Eve doubt God, doubt what he said, doubt what, and there's a teachable moment there that anytime we begin to question God's word in reading the Bible or even praying, we can begin to question other things that God says. Does that really matter? Did God really say that? And, and it's the same trick that he uses over and over and over again. And so, and we find that the one thing that he does is tries to remove the burden for the Lord and change it for a burden for something else in the world. And no wonder 1 John says there in 1 John chapter 2, verse 15, love not the world, and neither the things that are in the world. And if a man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that's in the world is the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, and it's not of the Father, but of the world. And the world passeth away in the lust thereof, but he that doeth the will of the Father abideth forever. And so, just like the devil, when we look at things that please us more than the Lord, we're going to keep the best for ourselves, and we're going to give God the leftovers. And it brings dishonor to the Lord. It brings dishonor to his name. And, what is the fruit of all this? What is the fruit and result when God is no longer honored, when there's no longer a burden? Well, 2 Timothy, we know that in 2 Timothy chapter 3, 2 Timothy chapter 3, we know that in the last days, right? In the last days, Paul told Timothy that there's going to be people that are going to dishonor the Lord. There's going to be people that are basically going to lack burden. There's going to be people that will live for themselves. And he says in 2 Timothy 3, verse 1, he says, know this also, that in the last days, Timothy, perilous times shall come, troublesome times. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those things that are good, traitors, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. And he says, from such turn away from. These are the last days, he says. These are the times that We look at the world, we look at all these things, that there's going to be hard times, there's going to be devilish times, there's going to be people that will worship themselves, there'll be people that give no honor to God and more honor to themselves. They would think more of themselves than God. And Paul wanted Timothy to know this. He forewarned him, this is what's going to happen. And loving, he says again, lovers of their own selves gives the idea of selfish, right? Selfish people. These in Malachi were selfish. We're going to give God the second best, and we're going to keep the best for ourselves. When people are in love with themselves, that's what happens, right? And so Satan says, be in love with yourself. You're okay. Covetous, right? Do whatever makes you feel happy. If that's what you want, grab it. If that's what you need, don't need, but you want it, just get it. Boasters, pretenders, self-willed, proud, disobedient to parents. I think we know that that's a very common thing, right? Ungrateful. Again, were they thankful for what God has done for them? If they were grateful, they would have honored him with the first fruits, right? The very best. Without natural affection, unloving, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, no self-control, fierce. But what you get down here, men shall be their own gods. And you look at in a way of basically trusting themselves, looking at themselves more than God himself, relying on God. They will have their own selfish religion, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. And that's really what you look at Malachi. They had a form. They had a form of godliness. They had the emotions. They had they had the material, but it wasn't the right material, because what was the problem? The heart wasn't in it. The heart was missing. They had everything there, but they had a form, but there was no power. There was no godliness behind it. There was no and by the way, when you look at Timothy, it was a choice. They denied it. They denied the power. So there's a choice to be made of being content in the form. They were content in the form of bringing these animals that were second best. What do you mean? We were doing this. You got something. They were content. And so there's a form there, but they're denying the power. They're denying the honor that God should have by giving the leftovers in his life. And so here's where it gets crazy. And here's what God, gets really serious with this in Malachi chapter 1. Again, that all comes from Satan. And we know in the last days there's a lot of people that will have forms of godliness, but they'll deny the power thereof. And God asks the question in chapter 1, verse 9. What does God say about a burdenless people? And he was talking to them, and the priests were just as guilty as the people. He says in verse 9, and now I pray you, beseech God that he will be gracious unto us, that this hath been by your means. Will he regard your persons, saith the Lord of hosts? They were expecting God to hear the prayers and still bring the second best to God. And God says, you're still expecting me to hear your prayers and answer the prayers? You're still expecting me to listen to what you, and answer the things that you asked me of? And the people were, again, insensitive to their sin against God, yet they still cried to the Lord for mercy whenever they got in trouble. They expected God to accept their defiled offerings as if there's nothing wrong. And God says, it's wrong. And notice verse 10. God had enough. He says, who is there among you that would shut the doors for naught? Neither do you kindle fire on my altar for naught. I have no pleasure in you, saith the Lord of hosts. Neither will I accept the offering at thy hand. The Lord asked the question, is there not even someone among you who would shut the temple doors and just stop the mess altogether? You know what God was saying? He was saying it's better to shut the doors than go through the motions. It's better to stop everything, stop offering. And he says, is there anyone among you that will stand up and say, this is enough, this is wrong, this is not right, God's not accepting this, God's not appreciative of this, he's not being honored? He says, is there any priest, is there anyone to say, this is wrong, this has got to stop? And in essence, God says, listen, I have no pleasure in you, saith the Lord of hosts, neither will I accept the offering at your hand. Stop. Just stop. It's not doing anything for your case. You're bringing these offerings, and really they represent Christ. They were to picture Christ, and yet they were bringing blemished animals, and they messed up the picture. But also, these animals were a type or a way of showing atonement for sins or covering of sins, right? Not that the animal took away, but it was a picture of it. And so that picture, they were really not only dishonoring God, but they were dishonoring themselves. How could God accept the sacrifice when it's lame and blind and broke, and you're expecting God to answer prayers, you're expecting God to forgive sins, and when you're bringing this, God says, I will have nothing of it. I don't want to deal with it. Isaiah chapter 1. This was not the first time, which is interesting because you can see man's habits. They have a way of continuing. And Isaiah chapter 1, Isaiah dealt with this as well. And in verse 11, Isaiah 1 verse 11, he says the same thing there, different timing. But he says, to what purpose, in verse 11, to what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices unto me, saith the Lord? I'm full of the burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fed beast, and I delight not in the blood of bullocks, or the lambs of the he-goats. When you come to appear before me, who hath required this at your hand? To tread my courts. Bring no more vain oblations. Incense is an abomination to me. The new moons and the Sabbaths are the calling of assemblies I cannot away with. It is iniquity, even the solemn meeting. Your new moons and your appointed feast, my soul hateth. They are terrible unto me. Boy, this is some strong language, isn't it? I'm weary to bear them. There's that bear, right? I'm weary, and when ye spread forth your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Yea, when ye make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. Whew. You talk about some seriousness. Was God accepting of their sacrifices? He says, I'm tired of it. I'm done with them. They're just a form, and there's no heart, there's no honor, there's no there's no meaning behind them. God says, I hate these things. I despise these things. They're things that I'm done with. And so when you look at what Malachi says too, he says, listen, priest, listen, people, you're not only doing this and it's dishonoring me, but you're also teaching the Gentiles how good your God is, or how well you honor God by bringing the leftovers. So it's a teaching moment too. You're not only teaching those in your own group to bring the garbage, but you're also teaching others. And of course, he says the Gentiles are going to, bless him. But the point is, of course, that people, the lesson for us, of course, is this: the idea of have a burden for the Lord, because we don't want to end up in a situation like Israel, when they were just going through the motions, and they were just giving God the leftovers, and they weren't burdened. They weren't burdened as the Lord wanted them to be. They were burdened, all right, but they were burdened in weariness of coming and serving. They were burdened, man, just another time. God says it should be a joy. It should be exciting to be able to do the will of God. It should be something that's the forefront of your mind. That should be something that's look forward to. And so it wasn't that way for Israel during this time. And of course, they continued going through these things, thinking that God was accepting their sacrifices, and God kept telling them, I'm not. And they're just empty. There's nothing there, and I'd rather it just stop than you to continue on. And so when you think about entering God's house, when you think about serving him, when you think about worshiping him, we ought to come to God's house expecting to meet him, and not just expect, of course, being here for a service, but we're here because we love the Lord. We're here because it's exciting to be here, and I want to bring my very best. I want to bring the very best, and sometimes I don't get as much sleep as I should, but sometimes I find when I was younger that I gave God the leftovers of my time and leftovers of my sleep. I'd stay up too late and figure I'd go to church on Sunday morning. I'm half asleep, but that's not giving God the very best. That's giving him the leftovers. Well, if I can do this and that, and again, we can give other things our very best, but what do we do with God? And that's really the point, right? Is God, where's my honor? Where's my fear? Where's my love for me? You know, where is it in your life that lifts me up? And so when you think about this, the only cure for God's people during the time of Malachi and Isaiah was come back to a place where they were honoring God. They were no longer just going through the motions, and they stopped bringing their sacrifices that were unacceptable. They begin to go back to the standard of what God said and not listen to the devil. Did God say that? Does he really mean that? You know, there's got to be loopholes, right? God has no loopholes in his word. He expects the very best. And so the only cure, of course, is to make God valuable once again in our lives. And that means having a burden for him, right? Having a burden for him. And so in his will, in his work. And I pray that tonight that we can take this and, and be at a place in our life where we can stir a burden, have a burden for the Lord. And of course, it's something the Lord puts there, right? It's something he desires us to have, and it will be seen in our daily lives. It will be seen in our activities when we come to church. It'll be seen in having a smile on our face, of being here. It'll be seen not in right? God wants our very best, and he deserves our very best. So the question is, are we giving him our very best? That is the question, right? And so that's what Malachi challenged Israel during that time. God did through Malachi, and of course Isaiah as well. So it is a challenge for all of us. Are we giving our very best? And don't settle for second best. God's not going to do it, right? God's not going to settle for second best. He wants the very best of our lives. Amen.